New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System J5381, Nadir Jump Point, Jump Ship Rabbit's Foot, March 18th, 3152. Lieutenant Cal Levitt felt quite accomplished in the moment as the mule dropship named Akrai slowly built speed and headed toward the chilly, rocked planet where the rest of the team was waiting. He was covered in sweat and some grime after helping Vasil and the others load the dropship with some additional gear to support what had been described as a major discovery over the long-range communications link with the Eulalia. With the second dropship away, Cal didn't feel comfortable about leaving the Rabbit's Foot, so he resisted the temptation and sent Vasil on with some of the crew. He was having trouble not getting excited at the prospect of a discovery so good it required both dropships. He was making his way back up to the bridge of the Rabbit's Foot when he heard a chirp on his comlink. He recognized the voice of the ship's comms officer. The voice stated, "We've got a jump ship flare at the Nadir jump point. It happened just a minute ago." Levitt ran the rest of the way to the bridge. When his boots hit the deck plating, he could see it was abuzz with activity. People were shuffling around and everyone was talking. "Sit rep, folks. What's going on?" The communications officer, well-trained but green, walked up to the holotable and pulled up a very poor quality 3D render of a jump ship, which flickered off after a couple of seconds, only to restart again on a loop. Cal walked up to it, took in the limited view, and furrowed his brow. He looked over and said, "Kirsch, is that all we have? What are the specs on this thing? Is it talking?" Corporal Miri Kirsch, the ship's greenhorn comms officer, shook her head and replied, "That's all we were able to get, sir. I think we're being locked down. I tried to pull up the Akrai and let them know that but we haven't gotten anything back. Then the Akrai and everything else disappeared from our scanners. We're blind and deaf out here." Cal tapped his knuckle against the edge of the holotable in frustration. The jump ship was at another point, so it wasn't an immediate threat, but if it sent over a dropship, the Rabbit's Foot was in trouble. "How long would it take for a dropship to get from the Nadir to the Zenith jump point?" Levitt asked. Mary looked down at her console, clicked a few things before responding. 4.5 days, maybe less depending on the speed of the dropship. "Try to get a message out to both dropships. Let them know that they might have company and need to get back to the ship as quickly as possible. Let's get the Rabbit's Foot ready to go," Levitt said as he walked over to the command chair and toggled the ship-wide comms link. He glanced back at the short clip of the fuzzy jump ship image before speaking into the mic. "This is Lieutenant Levitt. We have an unknown jump ship at the Nadir jump point, and it does not appear friendly. We need to start preparing for a jump. Kip, I need you on the bridge ASAP." Turning back to walk to the holotable, he looked over at Kirsch, who was busy trying to get that message out. His eyes tracked over the other consoles, with crew all frantically doing their jobs, and finally down to the repeating jump ship hologram. "What are you up to?" New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System J5381, Planet B, March 20th, 3152, 1310 hours. Landing the Akrai near the Eulalia wasn't a problem, though Vasil was on edge as no one on the dropship had heard anything on the comms from either the Rabbit's Foot or the planet since they left over 2 days ago. That kind of communication blackout rarely indicated an uneventful trip. Walking down the sloped dropship ramp, taking in the view with each step, Vasil was not expecting to see what looked like the most poorly designed field supply depot ever constructed. Through his battle armor's heads-up display, he was able to quickly sort out the Calliope and Commando, but Olivia's Thunderbolt was nowhere to be seen, and there were 3 other battle mechs in the valley. All 3 were painted black at the feet and gradually faded up to a light gray near the heads. The largest mech was easily identifiable as a 100-ton king crab. The other 2 were smaller designs, and it took his computer a few seconds to pull up their IDs. The Grim Reaper was 55 tons, and the Helios 60. Only the King Crab was active, plodding its way on a patrol. "What's going on here?" Vasil asked over the NEC comm frequency. Akif's voice responded, but it was difficult to hear what he said over the shouting in the background. "Repeat. What is going on?" Vasil asked again, starting to jog toward where he saw the others standing around a large pile of crates dumped into the snow outside of the brick ruins. Closing fast, he loomed large over the rest of the crew, though they did not notice him. Captain Barrett and the Mechwarrior Olivia were screaming at each other, and both May and Akif were trying to play peacemaker. "You're gonna get us all killed!" Olivia screamed, trying to get past May, who was trying her best to stand in the way. Firing back, Rin yelled, You've been sabotaging this mission from the start with your attitude. Vasil was confused as to why they were being held back from settling whatever the issue was. Let them fight, he said over the open speaker in his battle armor. To unprotected ears from just a few meters away, the statement was loud enough to give everyone pause, if not ringing ears. Olivia looked over at Vasil and said, "This is all word of Blake's Shadow Division gear. If even one piece of this is identified for what it is, we will be hunted by everyone." Vasil gritted his teeth at the mention of the word of Blake, and he turned toward Rin, who was already sporting the beginning of a black eye. She spoke past Akif, who was still standing between the two angry women. She said, "This is exactly the sort of thing we were sent out here to find. The word of Blake is gone. These are all just things. The information we could gather from some of this technology would be prized by both the wolves and the Combine." It sounds like something that could be resolved in a circle of equals. May and Akif, let them fight. The first to yield withdraws, and the issue is settled, Vasil said in a very matter-of-fact way. Seriously? Akif asked. Fine by me, Olivia said, balling up her fists. You can't stop destiny, Olivia, Rin replied. Akif and May looked at each other for a moment, then gave up and moved aside. Vasil didn't expect to be watching a circle of equals fight today, but life is full of little unexpected moments. As they squared off and circled each other, Vasil figured Olivia had the edge. Sure enough, the Mechwarrior charged in and knocked Rin off of her feet, sending both tumbling to the snow-covered ground. Grappling while yelling and grunting with exertion, Olivia vented her frustrations now that it was clear that Rin had lied about giving up all the information gathered from the HPG site. You're a reckless liar, she growled as she rabbit-punched Rin in the stomach. Rin let out a wheezing cough as the air left her lungs. Kicking her legs out, Rin was able to unbalance Olivia enough to get out from under her before swinging one leg around to kick Olivia in the shoulder and sending the Mechwarrior sprawling. May and Akif looked around nervously, as if this were an academy brawl between classmates which might be broken up at any second. As Olivia was about to lunge again toward Rin, a shadow fell across the entire group. Turning in his battle armor, Vasil immediately felt his adrenaline pump as a pair of dropships fell from the sky. Get to your mechs. Now, he bellowed. Akif and May wasted no time and ran directly to their nearby battle mechs, while Olivia and Rin slowly scrambled up onto their feet. Vasil was on the move quickly, yelling at the dropship crews to drop whatever they were doing and get back into the ships. It was chaos manifest, and every passing moment felt wasted. Vasil opened the comms link with Tenica and asked, Is that you in the King Crab? Heck yeah, it is. How do you like my new ride? Tenica said in a jovial manner. We have incoming dropships. Get back here and put yourself between us and them. Look menacing, Vasil said as he grabbed a crate and dragged it over to toss onto a pile, creating a slightly higher bit of cover. His mind was running a mile a second, trying to create as menacing a series of barriers as possible. No matter what came out of those dropships, he wanted to present a challenge. Rin ran up on Vasil and told him to stop. We'll talk to them. There's more stuff here than we need. We can work out a deal, Rin said, trying to calm the elemental as he added a crate labeled BattleTech actuator to the pile he was creating. That is your job. My job is to keep everyone safe if you fail. Vasil responded as he ran from her to create another pile of crates. The two egg-shaped ships slowly settled down on plasma fire and smoke. Blown water vapor, dirt, and debris billowed even further out, scarring the pristine snow. Vasil looked back at the Akrai and Eulalia, his suit estimating the distance and confirming that whoever these people were, they knew enough to land outside the range of any of the mule's weapons. When they cut their engines, there was a short silence as nature reasserted itself in the valley. Smoke drifted, and water vapor slowly returned to its solid form. Vasil zoomed in on his HUD to try to ID the ships, but there were no markings other than the dark gray paint that both dropships looked like they had been dipped in. There was clear wear and tear and a suspicious lack of maintenance which told Vasil these were not regular house forces, and they sure the heck weren't clan. The dropship doors cracked open and began their slow crawl toward the ground, as May and Akif took their first steps in their battle mechs toward Vasil. Tenica was not far behind, slowly trotting up the slight incline toward the forming line between the two pairs of dropships. When the ramps hit the snow-covered ground, Vasil stood waiting with 3 battle mechs at his back. The Helios and Grim Reaper still stood pilotless, facing the Eulalia, with their backs to the new arrivals. Rin continued to walk toward the gray dropships, now more than 50 meters ahead of the rest of the NEC crew. "You are too far out ahead," Vasil said into the comms. After a few seconds, Rin replied, "Just stand down, I will sort this out." Vasil got the notification for a private channel connection. When he joined, he heard Olivia and Tenika's voices in the back and forth. "Are we going to fire on these guys if they take out the captain?" Olivia asked. "I would assume so. Vasil, what do you think?" Tenika responded just as Akif and May joined the channel as well. Vasil watched as the jet-black 80-ton Victor stepped out onto the ramp of one dropship, while a Marauder with a matching matte black scheme took its first steps out from the other ship. Behind each of those mechs, a 50-ton Enforcer and then a 75-ton Mortis. That last mech was painted black just like the others, except for the massive scythe-like axe in its hands, which was painted glossy red in a pattern that was clearly intended to mimic blood. With a grunt, Vasil said, "We are outgunned, but it would be a glorious fight." "Should have known the Falcon was ready for a fight," Keith chimed in. May hadn't said anything since joining the channel, and instead of standing along with the others, she was pacing in her commando a couple of dozen meters back. The newcomer lance of mechs slightly advanced from their dropships and then stopped. Then the Mortis took a few more steps. A magnified view of Vasil's HUD showed the captain from the back. She was making hand gestures as if she was talking, but a scan of the frequencies showed no open channels. "I think they are talking on a closed channel," Vasil said as he double-checked his weapon systems for the 10th time in the past minute. "Why would she not include us?" Tenika asked. "The captain keeps a lot of dirty secrets, Tenika," Olivia responded. "So if this goes sideways, Vasil?" Tenika queried again after ignoring Olivia's comment. Vasil watched more closely, trying to pick out any sign of how the conversation was going. Before he could respond, the Mortis took several steps, accelerating towards Rin. The NEC Mechwarriors watched in horror as the Mortis closed the gap and swung its scythe at her. "Go!" Vasil roared into the comms as he fired his jump jets, rocketing up into the air to close the gap with the captain quickly. Rin began to run as soon as she saw the Mortis prepare to strike, and barely managed to dive out of the way of the gigantic weapon. Unfortunately, the rush of air the weapon brought with it knocked the air out of her lungs and slammed her down onto the cold, rocky ground. May's commando raced past the line toward the middle, missiles launching toward the Mortis as it was still in the backswing. Roughly half of the short-range missiles peppered the Mortis and forced it to take the focus off of the captain. Over the next few seconds, 3 things happened. The first was a cascade of fire from both sides as the mechs opened up on each other. Lasers burned through the atmosphere in a kaleidoscope of colors. Missiles streaked towards targets in perfect arcs of fire and white plumes of smoke. The second thing that happened in those first few seconds was Tenika's king crab slumping forward into a full shutdown. The second she squeezed the triggers to fire both heavy PPCs, it locked up and all the systems went dark. The third thing involved a largely ignored distant rumble of machinery long dormant in the hills above the valley. Sensors calibrated to pick up the sounds and atmospheric shifts of battle woke up and started to run their code. Wheels began to turn and tracks began to roll. Akif was quick to run and circled the field, moving with purpose to avoid incoming fire while adding his own into the fray. He lined up his plasma rifle on the Mortis, but just as he pulled the trigger, the Victor stepped into the line of fire. The ball of plasma slammed into the armored shoulder of the Victor and burned into the plate with sparks and fury, but caused little actual damage. The 80-ton monster of a mech lined up a return shot, which sent a Gauss rifle slug whizzing through the Calliope's moving legs. Akif breathed a sigh of relief as he cycled his medium pulse lasers at the new target. May's brow furrowed in fierce determination as she ran her commando into the fray, trying to distract from any further aggression toward the captain. She zigged and zagged the mech while doing everything she could to stay upright. The mech's internal structure groaned from the incredible stresses being put on it. 2 PPC shots cut across her mech, one of which seared away much of the armor on her right arm. May fought the controls and narrowly avoided smashing into one of the brick walls of the ruins over the hidden depot. Descending into the rocky, snowy ground with a crunch after a second jump, Vasil knelt down to check on Rin. She coughed and was awake, though looked pretty banged up. "Stay here. I will return," he said into the external speaker before running a few meters away and triggering his jump jets again. "Not going Anywhere, Rin said, wiping blood from her lips with her hand. She shielded her eyes with the same hand as Vasile rocketed away, but then focused her vision on it. Her 2 outside fingers were bent at impossible angles. Oh, well, at least I'm going into shock, she muttered as a hand fell back to the ground. Just a minute before, Rin had felt so confident striding up to introduce herself to these newcomers. Sure, they looked a little menacing, but so long as she put on her game face and sounded official, things would work out. They had to. It was destiny. She wasn't prepared to hear such raucous laughter in response to her introduction. Things degraded quickly after that. The gruff voice on the private comms link explained, "You're on the wrong planet, Missy. This is Hex Prefecture turf, and you don't have permission to be digging around here." Well, I think we can come to an arrangement. We can't possibly fill our holds with all this, so we can split it 50-50, Rin said with some reluctance, though 50% is still better than 0. More laughter filled the comms link before the voice she presumed belonging to the pilot in the large mech with the scythe responded. Well, that wouldn't set a very nice precedent for looting our stuff. If we let you keep half, then everybody else wants half. Soon there's not much left. Rin was getting desperate and played her next card when she said, "We are in direct employ of the Draconis Combine. A fight against us would bring the fury of the dragon your direction." "Well," came the response. "I guess we'd better make sure we don't let the word get out," came the response before the mech charged at her. What happened next, Rin couldn't quite recall at the moment, as her view of the sky seemed to be narrowing a bit by the second. She tried to lift her hand to wipe her face again, but couldn't feel it or see if she was successful. This didn't seem like the destiny she was promised. "Damn it, work!" Tenica yelled as she frantically fiddled with the wires of the jumped console. The king crab remained motionless as the world was lit on fire around it. Thankfully, the mech wasn't taking fire as it looked like the intruders assumed it was always inert. Still, Tenica knew that her friends needed her. Somewhere May, Akif, Olivia, Rin, and Vasile were fighting for their lives, and here she was playing computer technician. After reconnecting a couple of more wires, Tenica slid back up and sat into the command chair, hitting the startup buttons on the console while uttering a prayer for the first time in decades. The console flashed and then lit up in a celebratory cascade of beeps and lights. She wanted to cheer and throw up her hands in victory, but there wasn't any time. Buckling quickly and sliding on her neural helmet, Tenica finally looked up to see the battlefield before her. The King Crab's computer started marking targets and IDing friendly units as she had programmed them into the system earlier that day. It also picked up Vasile's battle armor suit initially as a hostile until she marked it otherwise in the HUD with the movement of her eyes and a button on the right control stick. She felt a surge of both pride and concern as the little elemental landed on the left arm of the Mortis, which reacted by torso twisting wildly and trying to scrape him off with the hatchet. The King Crab's weapon systems chirped ready, and Tenica focused intensely before firing. The targeting reticle glowed brightly, and she squeezed the triggers for both heavy PPCs. Vasile clung on with all of his strength as the Mortis flailed and tried to knock him off. The scything hatchet came close, but the elemental was able to scramble back behind the mech's elbow. There he went to work. Venting all of his pent-up aggression into his task, he began to carve into the exposed joint of the mech with his small laser. Plastic and myomer burned as he fired again and again, pushing the power of the laser to its limit and dancing on the edge of locking up the weapon entirely. From the corner of his eye, he saw the victor draw near, but thankfully its attention was drawn elsewhere by a flash of a plasma cannon shot. Nearly tossed again by the Mortis, rapidly turning and swinging its arm, Vasile growled and fired yet again. This time the laser hit something important, and the entire left arm went slack. The barrel on the heavy PPC it carried pointed to the ground and swayed uselessly. Admiring the victory for a moment, it was cut short by the bright blue light that his battle armor struggled to dim in time to keep Vasile from seeing spots. The Mortis rocked backwards as both heavy PPC shots slammed into its center and right torso like twin freight trains of blue lightning. Armor wasn't blasted so much as it evaporated and boiled away, digging deep into the heavy mech's internal structure. Vasile acted on instinct and hit his jump jets even before he could see what happened. Only after starting his arc up into the air did he turn and see the Mortis slowly falling back and crashing to the snowy ground. Turning his attention to the nearby Victor, Vasil twisted on his arc only to see the Victor's hand rising up to meet him. May kept up the speed, but in 1 in every dozen shots, the marauder stalking her was getting lucky. The PPC wasn't scoring hits, but the 2 medium pulse lasers were slashing at her meager armor. She was giving as good as she was getting, sending SRMs into the marauder's tough hide as often as the reloader chimed in her ear. May growled in frustration, lining up her next shot when everything seemed to go wrong at once. Her run was turned into a tumble as she was slammed against her command chair restraints. The commando's right arm came completely off, and the left leg dangled by cables. It would have been an almost comical sight to see the little commando twirl through the air if there wasn't a human being inside. The Enforcer had closed to cut off the running commando. The LB-10X in its arm had caught May's mech full on. The mech-sized shotgun round had ripped through the already heavily damaged commando and scattered smoking bits of wreckage over dozens of meters. The annoyance handled, both the Enforcer and the Marauder turned toward the stalking kid crab. Hanging upside down in the dark, lit only by a fire behind her, May wondered why she wasn't already dead. Everything ached, and she could smell the chemicals and the smoke rapidly filling what was left of her cockpit. The cockpit glass was cracked, and smoke was escaping, but not fast enough to let in fresh air. Every breath burned. May reached out, trying to grasp at something, anything that could help her escape this impending doom. But in that moment of pure terror, she suddenly stopped. Her hands went limp as she remembered her promise to Ariana. The last words out of her mouth were, "I missed you." End Part 14. Sorry to have to leave mid-battle, but this really did need to be broken into 2 pieces, or else it would be an hour long. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have thoughts, predictions, complaints, queries, feel free to drop them into the comments below. The story's events are set in stone, but I would love to hear what you think might happen next. Big thanks if you're a fan of the series. I've been hearing lots from little birds here and there that the NEC story has been enjoyed, even outside of the usual channel fans, so that's really encouraging. I've also fielded several questions from people who wanted to get into BattleTech for the very first time as a result of visiting the channel, so that's awesome. The more people who play BattleTech, the better for everybody. Also, thanks to the Ko-Fi supporters, as always, for your continued contributions making this all happen. I'm still wrangling with Google about getting memberships added to the channel, but I will be keeping that Ko-Fi up and running either way, as it's a good place for mech commission payments and other 3D printing fun. With next week's Easter holiday, NEC 15 will likely be pushed to later in the week instead of the normal Sunday-Monday release, as is the norm. Otherwise, shenanigans will continue as usual. Take care, and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.